The wedding dress weighed heavy on Rebecca Norton's shoulders as she ran through the dusty streets of Fairplay, Colorado, her white silk train dragging through mud and horse manure, leaving a trail of ruined lace behind her like shed skin from a life she refused to live. The June sun beat down mercilessly in 1878, and sweat poured down her face, mixing with tears she had not realized she was crying. Behind her, she could hear shouting, the thunderous voices of her father and her almost husband Gerald demanding she stop this foolishness and return to the church, where 200 guests waited with expectant faces and empty stomachs. But Rebecca's feet kept moving, her borrowed boots pinching her toes through the ridiculous white stockings her mother had insisted upon. She had never wanted this marriage, had begged her father to reconsider, but he had gambling debts that needed settling and Gerald had money. That was all that mattered in her father's world. Rebecca ducked into an alley between the general store and the saloon, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her corset crushing her ribs. She pressed herself against the wooden wall and tried to think. She had no money, no horse, nowhere to go. The mountains loomed in the distance, beautiful and terrifying, promising freedom and death in equal measure. She could not go back. Death seemed preferable to a lifetime shackled to Gerald, a man who had made it abundantly clear during their brief courtship that he expected absolute obedience and had a heavy hand when crossed. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. A lone rider was coming down the main street at an easy pace, his horse's gait unhurried. Rebecca peered around the corner and saw a tall man on a sturdy bay mare, his hat pulled low over his eyes, dust coating his worn jacket and chaps. He looked like he had been riding for days. The man guided his horse toward the water trough outside the general store, and Rebecca made a decision born of pure desperation. She gathered her filthy skirts and ran toward him, nearly tripping over the train. The man looked up, startled, his hand going instinctively to the gun at his hip before he registered that the person rushing toward him was a woman in a wedding dress and clearly not a threat. "Please," Rebecca gasped, reaching him. "Please, you have to help me. I need to get out of town right now. I will work for you, clean for you, cook, anything. Just please take me with you." The man stared at her with eyes the color of storm clouds, confusion and wariness written across his sun-weathered face. He was handsome in a rough way, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw shadowed with stubble. He looked to be in his early 30s, maybe a decade older than Rebecca's 21 years. "Madam, I do not know what kind of trouble you are in, but I am not in the habit of taking strange women anywhere," he said, his voice deep and cautious. "They are going to force me to marry a man who will hurt me," Rebecca said, the words tumbling out desperately. "I ran from the church. Please, I am begging you, I can work hard. I am strong. Just get me away from here." The man's eyes softened slightly, and he glanced down the street where the shouting was growing louder. A group of men had emerged from the church, Gerald at the front in his expensive suit, his face purple with rage. "There she is," someone shouted. The man looked at Rebecca, then at the approaching mob, and something in his expression shifted. He reached down and offered his hand. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Rebecca lied, having been on a horse perhaps 3 times in her life. "Then get up here. Quick." Rebecca grabbed his hand and he hauled her up behind him with surprising strength. She barely had time to settle herself, wrapping her arms around his waist and crushing her voluminous skirts between them, before he kicked the horse into a gallop. They thundered down the street in the opposite direction of the mob, Rebecca clinging on for dear life as the wind whipped her veil behind her, and the shouts of angry men faded into the distance. They rode hard for what felt like hours but was probably only one, following a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills. Rebecca's legs ached from gripping the horse, her arms burned from holding on, and her backside was in agony from bouncing on the animal's rump. But she did not complain. Every stride took her further from Gerald and that suffocating future. Finally, the man slowed the horse to a walk, then stopped altogether near a small creek that gurgled through a stand of aspens. He dismounted and turned to help Rebecca down. Her legs gave out the moment her feet touched the ground, and she would have fallen if he had not caught her. "Easy there," he said, steadying her. "You all right?" Rebecca nodded, though she was far from all right. Now that the adrenaline was fading, the reality of what she had done was sinking in. She had run away from her wedding, abandoned her family, and thrown herself on the mercy of a complete stranger in the middle of the Colorado wilderness. She had no belongings, no money, no plan. She started to shake. The man guided her to sit on a fallen log, and then went to let his horse drink from the creek. Rebecca watched him move, noting the easy confidence in his movements, the way he spoke softly to the animal. After a moment, he came back and sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Name is Marcus Brady," he said. "I have a ranch about 2 hours north of here. Nothing fancy, just me and some cattle. I could use help, I suppose, if you were serious about that." "Rebecca Norton," she replied, then added quickly, "and I was absolutely serious. I will do anything. I promise I will earn my keep." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "That fellow back there, was he the groom?" Rebecca nodded. "Gerald. My father owes him money. Gerald agreed to forgive the debt if I married him. And you did not want to marry him." "He hit me during our second meeting," Rebecca said quietly. "When I disagreed with something he said. My father told me I must have provoked him, that a good wife learns not to provoke her husband." Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble. "Your father is wrong. A man who hits a woman is no man at all." The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, made something in Rebecca's chest loosen. She had started to believe her father was right, that she was being difficult and childish, that all women endured such things. "Thank you," she whispered. "For helping me." Marcus shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Could not leave you to that. My mother raised me better." He stood and offered his hand again. "We should keep moving. They might try to follow." The rest of the journey passed in tired silence. Rebecca dozed against Marcus's back, exhausted from fear and exertion, waking periodically when the horse shifted beneath her. The sun was setting when they finally arrived at Marcus's ranch. It was small, as he had said. A modest cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that had seen better days, a chicken coop, and a corral containing a few horses. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the orange sky. It was simple and rough, but there was something honest about it that appealed to Rebecca. No pretense, no falseness, just a man making a life from hard work and stubbornness. Marcus helped her down again and led his horse to the barn. Rebecca stood in the yard, suddenly uncertain. Now what? Marcus emerged from the barn and gestured toward the cabin. "Come on, you must be starving." The inside of the cabin was as simple as the outside. One large room with a wood stove, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and not much else. It was clean, though, Rebecca noticed. Sparse but tidy. "I will sleep in the barn," Marcus said, reading her thoughts. "You can have the cabin. There is a trunk over there with some of my mother's old things. They might fit you better than that." He nodded at her ruined wedding dress. "Your mother lived here. She died 3 years ago, fever. My father passed when I was 10. She held on to this place by herself until I was old enough to take over properly. Strong woman." There was grief in his voice, but also pride. "I am sorry for your loss," Rebecca said. Marcus nodded acknowledgement and moved to the stove, stirring up the coals and adding wood. I will make us something to eat, then show you where everything is. Tomorrow we can figure out what needs doing." They ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread, sitting across from each other at the small table. Marcus was not much for conversation, but the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. Rebecca found herself studying him in the lamplight. His hands were rough and scarred from work, his face lined by sun and hardship, but there was a gentleness to him that put her at ease. He had saved her without asking for anything in return. That was more than any man in her life had ever done. After dinner, Marcus showed her the well outside, the privy, where he kept the firewood. He gave her a clean towel and soap, and pointed out the creek where she could bathe in the morning. Then he tipped his hat, grabbed a blanket, and headed for the barn, leaving her alone in his home. Rebecca stood in the quiet cabin for a long moment, hardly believing the events of the day. This morning she had woken up in her childhood bedroom, preparing to become Gerald's wife. Now she was standing in a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere, her wedding dress a filthy ruin, her entire life changed. She went to the trunk Marcus had mentioned and opened it carefully. Inside were neatly folded clothes, simple dresses and work clothes that had belonged to his mother. Rebecca ran her fingers over the fabric, thinking about the woman who had worn them, who had raised a son capable of such kindness. She selected a nightgown and changed out of the wedding dress, leaving the expensive silk in a heap on the floor. Tomorrow she would burn it. Rebecca lay down in Marcus's bed, pulling the rough blanket up to her chin. The mattress was thin and the pillow flat, but it was the most comfortable she had ever been. She was free. Whatever happened next, she was free. She fell asleep thinking about Marcus Brady and his storm-gray eyes. The next morning, Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. For a moment, she was disoriented, not recognizing where she was. Then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly, noticing that someone had been inside while she slept. A fire burned in the stove, warming the morning chill, and a pot of coffee sat waiting. Marcus must have slipped in to start the day. Rebecca dressed quickly in one of the simple calico dresses from the trunk, finding it a bit loose but serviceable. She braided her long dark hair and splashed cold water on her face from the basin near the door. Then she stepped outside into the crisp morning air. Marcus was in the corral with one of the horses, running a brush over its coat in long, steady strokes. He looked up when Rebecca approached and gave her a small nod of greeting. "Morning. Coffee is hot if you want some. There is bread and preserves in the cupboard." "Thank you," Rebecca said. "What can I do to help?" Marcus seemed surprised by the question. "You should rest today. Yesterday was a lot." "I told you I would work," Rebecca said firmly. "I meant it. Please let me help." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Chickens need feeding and the eggs collected. Coop is over there. Feed is in the barrel by the door. After that, if you know how to cook, I would not say no to a proper meal. I am not much in the kitchen." Rebecca smiled, feeling useful for the first time in her life. "I can do that." The work was harder than she expected. The chickens were aggressive, pecking at her hands as she scattered feed. Collecting eggs required reaching into dark nesting boxes while imagining all the spiders that might be lurking within. But Rebecca persisted, and by the time she returned to the cabin with a basket of eggs, she felt a small surge of pride. She found supplies in the cabin's small pantry. Flour, lard, dried beans, some salt pork, jars of preserved vegetables. Not much, but enough to make a decent meal. Rebecca had learned to cook from her mother, though she had rarely been allowed to do so once they hired a cook to suit their supposed social standing. Her father had been desperate to appear wealthier than he was, spending money they did not have on appearances. It was what had led to his debts and her arranged marriage. Rebecca pushed those thoughts away and focused on the task at hand. She made biscuits from scratch, fried the salt pork and some eggs, and heated up preserved green beans with a bit of the pork fat for flavor. It was simple food, but it smelled wonderful. Marcus came in for lunch looking tired and dusty. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the table Rebecca had set with food steaming on tin plates. "You did all this. I told you I could cook," Rebecca said, feeling pleased with herself. "Sit down before it gets cold." They ate together again, and this time Marcus was more talkative. He told her about the ranch, how he had been building it up slowly over the years. He had about 50 head of cattle, a few horses, the chickens. He did occasional work for neighboring ranches when he needed cash, and he was hoping to expand his herd this year. "It is not much," he said, looking almost embarrassed, "but it is honest work and it is mine." "It is wonderful," Rebecca said honestly. "It is real. Everything in my life was pretense and appearances. This is better." Marcus looked at her with something like understanding. "Your family will be looking for you, I know." Rebecca had been trying not to think about that. "My father will be angry about the embarrassment. Gerald will be angry about being defied. But I cannot go back. I would rather die." "You will not have to go back," Marcus said firmly. "If they come here, I will handle it." The certainty in his voice made Rebecca's throat tight with gratitude. She barely knew this man, yet he was offering her protection without hesitation. The days fell into a rhythm. Rebecca woke early and cooked breakfast while Marcus did the morning chores. Then she would clean the cabin, tend the chickens, work in the small vegetable garden behind the house that had become overgrown. Marcus worked with the cattle, mending fences, breaking a young horse, doing the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. They would eat lunch together, then return to work until dinner. In the evenings, they would sit outside the cabin and watch the sun set over the mountains. Marcus would sometimes talk about his plans for the ranch, his hopes for the future. Rebecca would listen, enjoying the sound of his deep voice, the passion that crept into his words when he talked about the land. Other times they would sit in comfortable silence, just being. Rebecca found herself watching Marcus more and more. The way his shoulders moved when he chopped wood. The gentleness in his hands when he treated a horse's injured leg. The rare smile that transformed his serious face. She had never known a man could be like this. Strong but kind. Capable but humble. He never once made her feel afraid or small. 3 weeks after Rebecca's arrival, riders came. Marcus spotted them first, riding up from town in the afternoon heat. 4 men on horseback, moving with purpose. Rebecca was hanging laundry when Marcus strode over, his face grim. "Get in the cabin. Lock the door. Do not come out unless I tell you." Rebecca's heart hammered. "Is it them?" "I do not know yet. Just do as I say." Rebecca hurried inside, her hands shaking as she dropped the bar across the door. She peered through the window, watching as the riders approached. Her stomach dropped when she recognized her father's balding head and Gerald's expensive horse. Marcus stood in the yard, his hand resting casually on his gun belt as the 4 men reined in their horses. Gerald was there, looking furious. Rebecca's father beside him, looking old and tired. 2 other men Rebecca did not recognize flanked them, hired guns by the look of them. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Marcus asked calmly. Gerald dismounted, his movements sharp with barely controlled anger. "You have something that belongs to me." "I do not believe I do." "Rebecca Norton. A witness saw her leave town with you. She is my bride and you have stolen her." "Nobody stole anybody," Marcus said evenly. "A woman asked for help and I provided it. She is free to leave any time she wants." Rebecca's father spoke up, his voice wheedling. "Rebecca, honey, stop this foolishness. Come out and we will forget this happened. Gerald is willing to forgive you." Marcus glanced back at the cabin, then returned his attention to the men. Seems to me if a woman runs away from her own wedding, she has good reason. Maybe you should respect her wishes. Her wishes, Gerald spat. She is a woman. Her wishes do not matter. She belongs to me by contract. Nobody belongs to anybody, Marcus said, and there was steel in his voice now. This is my land. You are not welcome here. I suggest you leave. One of the hired guns moved his hand toward his weapon, but Marcus was faster. His gun was out and leveled before the other man had cleared leather. I would not, Marcus said quietly. I am a fair hand with this, and I have legal right to defend my property. You would be dead before you hit the ground, and your friend there would not fare much better. The tension stretched tight as a wire. Rebecca held her breath, terrified that someone would shoot, that Marcus would be hurt because of her. Finally, her father spoke. Please, Rebecca, do not do this to our family. Think of the shame. Rebecca found her courage and opened the window. I am thinking of myself for once, Father. I am not coming back. I am sorry for the debt, but I cannot marry Gerald. I will not. You ungrateful child, her father snarled. After everything I have done for you. You are going to sell me to pay your gambling debts, Rebecca shot back. That is not love. That is not family. Gerald's face was purple with rage. You will regret this, both of you. I am an important man in this territory. I can make your lives very difficult. Is that a threat? Marcus asked, his gun still steady. It is a promise. Then I will make you a promise in return, Marcus said. If you come onto my land again, if you threaten Rebecca or try to force her to do anything she does not want to do, I will kill you. That is not a threat. That is a fact. Now get off my property. For a moment, Rebecca thought Gerald would push it, would order his hired guns to shoot. But something in Marcus's eyes must have convinced him otherwise. Gerald remounted his horse, jerking the reins viciously. This is not over, he said. Yes, Marcus replied. It is. They watched the four men ride away, waiting until they were out of sight before Marcus holstered his gun. His hand was steady, but Rebecca could see the tension in his shoulders. She rushed out of the cabin. Are you all right? She asked breathlessly. I am fine. Are you? Rebecca nodded, though she was shaking. Thank you again. You keep saving me. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Recognition maybe, or understanding. The space between them felt charged, electric. Rebecca, I need to ask you something, Marcus said, his voice rough. Do you want to stay here? Really stay? Because if you do, if you want to make this permanent, we could get married. Legally. Then they could not touch you, you would be protected. Rebecca's heart stuttered. You would marry me. Why? Marcus looked away, a flush creeping up his neck. I know it is not romantic. I know you do not love me, but I could provide for you, keep you safe. You would have a home, and I would have. He trailed off. You would have what? Rebecca pressed. Company, Marcus said finally. Someone to share this place with. I have been alone for a long time. It gets lonely. Rebecca thought about the past 3 weeks. The quiet meals, the shared work, the evening conversations, the way her heart jumped when Marcus smiled, the way she found excuses to be near him, the way she had caught him watching her sometimes with something soft in his eyes. I would not be marrying you just for safety, Rebecca said softly. I care about you, Marcus. I do not know if it is love yet, but it could be. It feels like it could be. Marcus turned back to her, hope flickering across his face. You mean that? I do. You are a good man. The best I have ever known, and I think I could be happy here, with you. A slow smile spread across Marcus's face, transforming him. Then let us do it properly. Let us go into town tomorrow, get the preacher, do it right. I want you to have a real wedding, Rebecca. Not running away, not forced. A choice. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. I already made my choice. But yes, let us do it properly. They rode into Fairplay the next morning, both dressed in their best clothes. Rebecca wore one of Mrs. Brady's old dresses, simple but clean, with her hair pinned up neatly. Marcus had shaved and put on a jacket that was slightly too small across the shoulders. They must have made an odd picture, but Rebecca did not care. The preacher was a kind older man named Reverend Walsh, who asked no questions when they requested his services. They were married in his small church with his wife and the church custodian as witnesses. It was nothing like the elaborate ceremony Rebecca's father had planned, and it was perfect. Marcus slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands gentle. "I promise to take care of you," he said. "To respect you and keep you safe." "I promise to stand beside you," Rebecca replied. "To build a life with you, to be your partner in all things." When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her carefully, sweetly, as if she were something precious. Rebecca kissed him back, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. They were legally married now. She was Rebecca Brady. She was free. They stopped at the general store on the way out of town to buy supplies. The owner, a gossipy woman named Mrs. Henderson, stared at them with wide eyes. "Rebecca Norton, I heard you ran away from your wedding. Now you are married to him." "Yes, madam," Rebecca said calmly. "This is my husband, Marcus Brady." Mrs. Henderson looked between them, clearly bursting with curiosity and judgment. But Marcus simply paid for their supplies, tipped his hat, and led Rebecca out of the store. Let them talk. Rebecca did not care anymore what anyone thought. The ride back to the ranch felt different. They were married now, truly bound together. Rebecca's nerves fluttered as she thought about what that meant, about the wedding night ahead. But Marcus seemed in no hurry, riding at an easy pace, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the land. When they arrived home, Marcus helped her down and then, to her surprise, swept her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" Rebecca laughed. "Carrying you over the threshold. It is tradition. We have been living here for weeks. But now it is official," Marcus said, grinning. He carried her into the cabin and set her down gently. Then his expression turned serious. "Rebecca, I want you to know I do not expect anything from you tonight or any night. We can take this as slow as you need. I will not push you, I will not force you. Ever." Rebecca looked at this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. This man who had saved her, protected her, married her. Who was now telling her that her comfort and consent mattered more than his own desires. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the scratch of stubble under her palm. "I want this marriage to be real, Marcus, in every way. I am not afraid, not with you." Marcus's breath caught. He covered her hand with his own, turning to kiss her palm. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." He kissed her then, deeper than before, and Rebecca felt heat bloom through her body. His hands were gentle as they had always been, treating her like something valuable. They moved to the bed together, nervous and tender, discovering each other slowly. Marcus was patient, checking in with her constantly, making sure she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. It hurt at first, but Marcus was gentle, whispering reassurances, kissing away her tears. And then it was not just gentle, it was good, and Rebecca understood why people wanted this. Not the cold duty her mother had warned her of, but something warm and connecting. A joining that meant something. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Marcus's arm around her waist, Rebecca's head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "I know this started out of necessity," Rebecca said quietly, "but I am glad it was you who helped me. I am glad it is you I married." Marcus pressed a kiss to her hair. "I am glad too. I never thought I would have this. A wife, a partner. I thought I would just be alone here forever." "You will never be alone again," Rebecca promised. "I am here. I am staying." The months that followed were the happiest of Rebecca's life. She and Marcus fell into an easy partnership, working the ranch together, building their life. Rebecca learned to ride properly, to work with the cattle, to shoot a rifle. Marcus taught her everything patiently, never making her feel stupid for not knowing. She was a quick learner, driven by genuine interest and the desire to be useful. The ranch began to thrive with two people working it. They expanded the garden, improved the barn, bought more chickens. Marcus bought 3 more cattle at auction, growing the herd. Rebecca made preserves and sold them at the general store, bringing in extra income. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and they were happy. Rebecca also began to notice changes in her body. She was tired often, nauseous in the mornings. Her courses, which had been regular as clockwork, did not come. She realized what it meant but was afraid to hope. She waited another week, then another, before she finally told Marcus. They were eating dinner when she gathered her courage. "Marcus, I think I might be pregnant." Marcus's fork clattered to his plate. He stared at her, eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "Not completely. But my courses have not come, and I have been sick in the mornings. And my mother told me once that she knew she was carrying me because she could not stand the smell of coffee." "You have been avoiding the coffee pot," Marcus said slowly, realization dawning. Then a huge grin split his face. "A baby. Rebecca, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, needing to hear it. "Happy," Marcus stood and pulled her into his arms. "I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed, I am terrified, I am so full of joy I think I might burst. You are giving me everything I never knew I wanted, a family." Rebecca hugged him tight, tears streaming down her face. Happy tears this time. She had run from one wedding and found herself in a real marriage. She had left behind a life of pretense and found something genuine. She had been lost and had been found. The pregnancy was not easy. Rebecca was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep food down. Marcus worried constantly, hovering over her like a nervous hen. He took over most of her chores, insisting she rest, cooking meals even though his cooking was terrible. Rebecca loved him for it, even as she insisted she was capable of working. As her belly grew, so did their excitement. They prepared the cabin for the baby, Marcus building a cradle from cottonwood he had cut himself. Rebecca sewed tiny clothes from fabric they bought in town. They argued good-naturedly about names. Marcus wanted strong names, family names. Rebecca wanted something hopeful, something that meant new beginnings. Winter came early that year. By the time Rebecca was 8 months along, snow blanketed the ranch and the passes into town were dangerous. They were essentially snowed in, just the two of them and the animals. Marcus worried about Rebecca giving birth without a doctor or midwife, but she was strangely calm. "Women have been having babies forever," she told him. "We will manage." "You are braver than I am," Marcus admitted. "I am terrified. Then we will be terrified together." The baby came on a cold February night in 1879. Rebecca's waters broke while she was washing dishes after dinner, and the pain started soon after. Marcus boiled water and gathered clean cloths like he had read in the medical book they had bought. Then there was nothing to do but wait and help Rebecca breathe through the contractions. It was long and hard and painful. Rebecca had never experienced anything like it. She screamed and cried and crushed Marcus's hand in hers. He stayed beside her the entire time, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement, never leaving even when she cursed at him. Finally, as dawn light began to creep through the window, the baby came. A boy, red-faced and screaming, perfect and alive. Marcus cut the cord with shaking hands and placed their son on Rebecca's chest. She held him close, exhausted and elated, hardly believing he was real. "He is beautiful," Marcus said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are amazing. You did it." "We did it," Rebecca corrected. She looked down at their son, marveling at his tiny fingers and the shock of dark hair on his head. "Hello, little one. We are your parents. We are going to take such good care of you." They named him Matthew Brady after Marcus's father. He was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them awake most nights but filled the cabin with life. Marcus was a devoted father, walking the floor with Matthew when he cried, changing his cloths without complaint, staring at him for hours like he could not quite believe he was real. "I used to think I was happy alone," Marcus told Rebecca one night as they lay in bed, Matthew sleeping in the cradle beside them. "I thought I had everything I needed, but I was wrong. This right here is everything. You are everything." Rebecca rolled to face him, placing her hand over his heart. "You saved me, you know. In every way a person can be saved. You gave me a home, a family, a real life. I love you, Marcus Brady." It was the first time either of them had said the words. They had been living it for months, showing it in 100 small ways, but speaking it aloud made it feel more real somehow. Marcus's eyes shone in the darkness. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you the moment you ran up to me in that wedding dress, all fierce and desperate. I knew you were special. I just did not know how much you would change everything." They kissed softly, carefully, mindful of the sleeping baby beside them. Then they held each other close, grateful for the strange journey that had brought them together. The years flowed by like water. Matthew grew from a baby into a toddler, then a little boy. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was curious and adventurous, always getting into trouble, always making them laugh. When he was 3, Rebecca became pregnant again. This time a girl, born in the spring with less drama than her brother. They named her Rose after Marcus's mother. Rose was gentler than Matthew, content to sit and watch the world while her brother ran wild. She adored her father, reaching for him the moment he came in from working. Marcus would scoop her up, pressing kisses to her chubby cheeks, completely wrapped around her tiny finger. The ranch continued to grow. With help from neighboring ranchers during busy seasons, Marcus expanded the herd to over 200 head of cattle. They built an addition onto the cabin, giving the children their own room. Rebecca's garden became famous in the area, providing vegetables not just for their family but for sale in town. They bought 2 more horses and a milk cow. They had their struggles too. A harsh winter when they lost 40 head of cattle to cold and disease. A drought year when the creek ran dry and they had to haul water from miles away. Matthew broke his arm falling from a tree, and Rebecca spent 3 days nursing him through fever, terrified they would lose him. But they weathered each crisis together, their bond growing stronger. Gerald tried to cause problems once, spreading rumors in town about Rebecca's morality and the circumstances of their marriage. But by then, Marcus and Rebecca were well-respected members of the community. Their hard work and genuine kindness had earned them friends and loyalty. The rumors went nowhere, and eventually Gerald gave up and moved to Denver, unable to bear the embarrassment of his runaway bride building a better life without him. Rebecca's father came to the ranch once when Matthew was 5. He looked old and frail, worn down by drink and regret. He asked to meet his grandchildren, and Rebecca, after discussing it with Marcus, agreed. The visit was awkward and painful. Her father offered a half-hearted apology, claiming he had been desperate, that he had thought he was doing what was best for her. Rebecca listened, holding Matthew on her lap while Rose played at her feet. Then she said, "I forgive you, Father. Not because what you did was right, but because holding on to anger only hurts me. But I cannot have you in our lives. You chose your path. I chose mine. I hope you find peace." He left without argument, and Rebecca never saw him again. She heard years later that he had died of liver failure in a boarding house in Denver. She felt sadness at the news but not grief. That man had never really been a father to her. Marcus was teaching her what real family looked like. When Matthew was 8 and Rose was 5, Rebecca became pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, leaving her exhausted and swollen. Marcus worried constantly, taking over most of her work, barely letting her lift a finger. Rebecca found it equal parts endearing and frustrating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she protested. "You are carrying our child," Marcus replied. "You are more precious than glass. You are everything." The baby came in late autumn, another boy they named Michael. He was small but strong, with a full head of red hair that neither parent could account for. Marcus joked that they must have an Irish ancestor somewhere. Michael was a content baby, sleeping through the night early, rarely fussing. He completed their family in a way Rebecca had not known was missing. They settled into their roles as parents of 3. Matthew helped his father with ranch work, learning to ride and rope at a young age. Rose helped her mother in the garden and with cooking. Michael toddled after everyone, trying to keep up with his older siblings. The cabin rang with laughter and noise and life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Marcus surprised Rebecca with a gift. It was a locket, delicate gold on a thin chain. Inside were tiny photographs of their 3 children. "I know it is not much," Marcus said, looking bashful, "but I wanted you to have something nice, something that shows what we have built together." Rebecca clutched the locket, tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect. You are perfect. This life is perfect." "It is not perfect," Marcus said with a smile. "The cabin leaks when it rains. The children fight constantly. The cattle get out at least once a week. My cooking is still terrible, but it is ours, and I would not change a single thing." Rebecca laughed through her tears. "You are right. It is not perfect. It is better than perfect. It is real." They stood together on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed their journey. Inside, their children played some elaborate game involving furniture and imagination. The cattle lowed in the distance. A dog they had acquired somewhere along the way barked at something in the yard. Marcus wrapped his arm around Rebecca's waist, pulling her close. She leaned into him, fitting against his side like she was made to be there. She thought about that desperate girl in a wedding dress, running through the streets of Fairplay, terrified and alone. She thought about the lonely rancher who had given her a chance when he had no reason to. "You ever regret it?" Marcus asked suddenly. "Leaving your old life?" "Sometimes I worry that you gave up too much, that you settled for less than you deserved." Rebecca turned to look at him, cupping his face in her hands. "Marcus Brady, listen to me. I did not give up anything. I gained everything. My old life was a pretty cage, all appearances and no substance. This life, this messy, chaotic, beautiful life is real. You are real. Our children are real. This love is real. I regret nothing." Marcus kissed her forehead, his lips lingering. "I love you, more than I can ever put into words." "I love you too. Thank you for saving me." "You saved me right back," Marcus said. "I was just existing before you came. Now I am living." The children called for them from inside, some urgent matter requiring parental attention. Rebecca and Marcus shared a look, a whole conversation passing wordlessly between them. Then hand in hand, they went inside to their family. The years continued to pass. The children grew. Matthew became a strong young man, taking on more and more responsibility for the ranch. At 19, he married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch, and they built a small house on the edge of Marcus's property. Rebecca gained a daughter-in-law and eventually grandchildren. Rose grew into a beautiful, intelligent young woman. She had no interest in ranching but loved teaching. She went to the new school in Fairplay and became a teacher herself, educating the children of the area. She married a kind man who worked at the bank, and they settled in town but visited the ranch often. Michael, with his bright red hair and easy laugh, loved the land as much as his father. He stayed on the ranch, working side by side with Marcus and Matthew, helping to expand the operation into one of the most successful in the area. Marcus and Rebecca grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined by time and sun and laughter. But they never grew apart. If anything, their love deepened with each passing year, refined by shared experience and mutual respect. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate. There was food and music and dancing under the stars. Marcus, who claimed he could not dance, swept Rebecca into his arms and waltzed her around the yard while everyone clapped and cheered. "Look at what we made," Marcus said, gesturing at the crowd. "All these people, this family, this life. We built this from nothing." "We built it from choice," Rebecca corrected. "I chose to ask for help, you chose to give it, we chose each other. Everything else grew from that." "Best choice I ever made," Marcus said. "Mine too." They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by love and laughter, their hearts full to bursting. Rebecca thought about how close she had come to a different life. How one desperate decision, one moment of courage had changed everything. She had been a runaway bride, fleeing from a future that would have destroyed her. Marcus had been a lonely rancher resigned to a solitary life. Together they had created something neither could have imagined. A real home, a real family, a real love. Years later, when Rebecca was 70 and Marcus was 80, they would sit on the porch in rocking chairs Marcus had made from oak he cut himself. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would play in the yard where Rebecca had once stood in a ruined wedding dress, begging a stranger for help. They would watch the sun set over the mountains they loved, hands clasped together, still choosing each other every single day. "I would do it all again," Rebecca said once, her voice soft with age. "Every moment, every choice, I would run to you again and again." Marcus squeezed her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "And I would catch you every time." The ranch house Marcus and Rebecca built still stood decades later, expanded and improved but fundamentally the same. It held generations of memories, of love, of family. It was a testament to what could grow from one act of kindness, one leap of faith, one woman brave enough to run toward her future instead of away from her past. Rebecca had given Marcus the family he always wanted. But the truth, which they both knew in their hearts, was that they had given each other everything. Not because either was incomplete alone, but because together they were more. They were partners, they were lovers, they were best friends, they were home. And when Marcus passed peacefully in his sleep at 83, with Rebecca holding his hand and their children gathered around, his last words were, "Thank you for running to me." Rebecca lived another 2 years, surrounded by the family they had built together. She spent her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren, tending her beloved garden, and looking at the mountains that had witnessed their great love story. And when she passed, also peacefully in her sleep, she wore the locket Marcus had given her with the photographs of their children close to her heart. They were buried together on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree Marcus had planted the year they were married. Their gravestone was simple, bearing their names and a single line that said everything that mattered: Marcus Brady and Rebecca Brady. They chose each other, and that choice, made in desperation and kindness, in hope and love, echoed through generations. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren grew up hearing the story of the runaway bride and the lonely rancher. They learned about courage and kindness, about seeing the person in front of you and choosing to help, about building something real instead of settling for appearances. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Each new Brady who worked the land knew they were standing on ground consecrated by love, by two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful from nothing but hard work and devotion. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Colorado mountains in that particular golden way, family members swore they could feel Marcus and Rebecca still there, still choosing each other, still building their life together, still home. The story of Marcus and Rebecca Brady became legend in Fairplay. New brides would visit their grave before weddings, asking for blessings on their marriages. Young women in difficult situations would invoke Rebecca's courage, finding the strength to choose their own paths. Men learning to be husbands and fathers would think of Marcus's patient kindness, his unwavering respect, because theirs was not just a love story. It was a story about seeing each other truly, about respect and partnership, about building something together that neither could have built alone. It was about the family you choose and the family you create. It was about running towards something instead of away from it, about finding home in another person. Matthew Brady, their grandson, wrote a small memoir in his later years about his grandparents. In it, he included a story his grandmother had told him when he was young. It was about the day she ran away from her wedding, how terrified and desperate she had been. How she had seen Marcus at the water trough, and something in her had simply known that this stranger was safety. "I was not running to him," Rebecca had told young Matthew. "I was running to my life, to my real life, and he was brave enough to help me find it. That is what love is, helping each other find the truest versions of yourselves." Those words were passed down, repeated, cherished. They became part of the family legacy, as much as the land itself. The ranch house, that cabin Marcus had built with his own hands and that they had expanded together over the years, eventually became a historical site. The Colorado Historical Society recognized it as an important example of frontier life and family homesteading. Tourists would come and walk through the rooms where Marcus and Rebecca had lived, where they had raised their children, where they had grown old together. But for the Brady family, it was never a museum. It was home, the place where everything started, where a lonely rancher had taken in a runaway bride and she had given him the family he always wanted, where both had found love, purpose, and belonging, and so the story ended where it began. With choice, with courage, with kindness, with two people who looked at each other and decided to build something beautiful together, no matter how impossible it seemed. They had carved out a life in the harsh Colorado wilderness, but more than that, they had carved out space in each other's hearts. They had been unlikely partners, a desperate woman fleeing from a forced marriage, a solitary man resigned to loneliness, but they had seen each other, really seen each other. And in that seeing, in that recognition of shared humanity and need, they had found everything. Their graves on the hill overlooking the ranch remained peaceful through all seasons. In spring, wildflowers grew around the headstone. In summer, the cottonwood tree provided cool shade. In autumn, the leaves turned gold and fell like blessings. In winter, snow covered everything in quiet white, peaceful and pure, and through it all the Brady family thrived. The ranch operated successfully well into the 20th century. The children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Marcus and Rebecca spread out across Colorado and beyond, carrying pieces of that original love story with them. They were teachers and ranchers and doctors and lawyers. They were people who knew their roots, who understood that they came from something real and good. When the family gathered for reunions, they would tell the story again. Each generation added their own details, their own perspective, but the core remained the same. Marcus had saved Rebecca. Rebecca had saved Marcus. Together they had built something that lasted, and that in the end was what mattered. Not wealth or fame or social standing, not the things Rebecca's father had valued, but family, real connection, love that deepened with time instead of fading. A legacy not of money or property, though those were nice, but of devotion and partnership and choosing each other every single day for 56 years. The town of Fairplay changed over the years. It grew and modernized. The church where Rebecca was supposed to marry Gerald was torn down in the 1920s. The general store where Mrs. Henderson had gossiped became a post office. But the stories remained. Old-timers would point out the path Rebecca had run down in her wedding dress. They would tell visitors about the rancher who had risked everything to help a stranger. Because that story, that simple act of kindness and courage, mattered. It reminded people that one decision could change everything. That sometimes running away was the bravest thing you could do. That real love was built, not found. That family was what you made it. Rebecca had been right all those years ago when she told her father that she forgave him but could not have him in her life. She had understood something fundamental. You cannot pour love into broken vessels and expect them to hold it. You cannot build on rotten foundations and expect the structure to stand. Sometimes you have to walk away from what is familiar and broken and build something new from scratch. That is what she and Marcus had done. Built new. Built true. Built together. And when the last living person who had known Marcus and Rebecca personally passed away in 1962, taking with them the first-hand memories of the couple, the story did not die. It lived on in family records, in the Historical Society's archives, in the DNA of everyone who came from that union, because some love stories do not end. They transform. They become part of the land, part of the air, part of the legacy. Marcus and Rebecca's love became the foundation upon which generations built their lives. Every Brady who loved deeply, who chose kindly, who built thoughtfully, was echoing that original choice made in 1878 when a runaway bride asked for help, and a lonely rancher said yes. The ranch itself eventually passed out of direct family ownership in the late 20th century, though Brady still lived and worked in the area. The Historical Society maintained the property, preserving it as it had been in Marcus and Rebecca's time. School children took field trips there, learning about frontier life. Tourists visited, taking pictures of the simple cabin and the beautiful land. But the real legacy was not in the building or the land. It was in the people. In every Brady who remembered where they came from. In every person who heard the story and found courage to make their own brave choices. In every couple who chose partnership over dominance, respect over control, love over fear. That was what Rebecca and Marcus had really built. Not just a ranch or a family, but a template for how to love well. How to see the person in front of you as fully human, deserving of dignity and choice. How to build together instead of trying to control. How to face hardship as a team. How to choose each other, over and over, through good times and bad. They had started with nothing but desperation and kindness. They had built everything. And that everything continued to ripple outward long after they were gone, touching lives they would never know, inspiring choices they would never witness. Because that is what real love does. It does not die when the lovers die. It transforms into legacy, into lesson, into light that guides others through their own darkness. Rebecca had run from darkness toward light, not knowing what she would find. Marcus had opened his hands and his home and his heart to possibility, not knowing what it would bring. Together, they had created something that outlasted them both. And in the end, is that not what we all hope for? To love and be loved. to build something that matters, to leave the world a little better than we found it, to be remembered not for wealth or fame but for kindness, for courage, for the love we gave and received. Marcus and Rebecca did all that and more. Two people who should never have met, who had every reason to remain strangers, who instead chose connection and built a life so full of love that it was still feeding souls over a century later. That was their true legacy. Not land or money or even children, though all those mattered. Their legacy was possibility. The possibility that even when things seem darkest, even when you are running in a ruined wedding dress through dusty streets with no plan and no hope, help might be waiting. Love might be waiting. Life might be waiting. All you have to do is be brave enough to run toward it. And if you are very lucky, someone might be brave enough to catch you. That is what happened to Rebecca Norton, who became Rebecca Brady. That is what happened to Marcus Brady, the lonely rancher who found that his ranch was not nearly big enough to hold all the love he had to give until someone showed up who could receive it. They saved each other. They built together. They loved completely. And their story, that simple story of kindness and courage and choosing each other, lived on. It lived on in the land that still bore their name, in the descendants who still carried their blood, in the lessons that still echoed through generations, in the graves on the hill where wildflowers grew and cottonwood leaves fell like blessings. It lived on in every person who heard the tale and thought, maybe I can be brave too. Maybe I can choose better. Maybe I can build something real. That was the gift Marcus and Rebecca gave. Not just to their children or their children's children, but to everyone who heard their story and found hope in it, found courage in it, found possibility in it. And so, even though Marcus Brady passed in 1941 and Rebecca Brady in 1943, they lived on. In memory. In legacy. In love. Their story was told and retold, each generation adding their own emphasis but never changing the core truth. A runaway bride. A lonely rancher. A choice made in desperation that became a choice made in love. A family built from nothing but hard work and devotion. A love that lasted 56 years and then beyond. That was their story. That was their gift. That was their legacy, and it endured.